talking about the life cycle of migration. So basically, there's the process of discovering. So what are the objects that you want to migrate in terms of views, in terms of tables, indexes, and so on and so forth. All of those things are analyzed. First of all, there's an assessment carried on it to compare the difference between your source and your target. So if there's a need for you to correct and fix either the object or some settings, all of those things will be done in an iterative process. And once that is done, right, it goes through this circle of, okay, fine, am I remediating the application? Am I applying some changes to the application to make it compatible with the upgrade of database, right? I'll carry out some performance testing, I'll optimize it, and then I can go on with the migration process. And then once the migration, so the first layer of the migration is movement of the objects. So your tables, your views, your objects, your users, those are first migrated. And then there's a data synchronization between the target and the source. And then there's a cutover, depending on the type of migration, if it is offline or online. Okay, so this is just talking about the different types of tools or methodologies used when carrying out database migration. So the first scenario is we have an SQL server, which is residing on premises, and with the use of data migration assistants or the data evaluation assistant, right? You can move those information from your SQL server to your to an higher version of SQL server. So these symbols usually is synonymous to like 2008, 2005, 2010 SQL databases. But this logo is more modernized. We started having logos like this when we talk about SQL Server 2017, 16, or SQL 2019, right? So this is one of the scenarios that you could have when you are trying to migrate SQL data. The second scenario is if you have data sitting in other databases or servers that are made from different vendors like Oracle, like SAP, like IBM, right? You can make use of the SQL Server Migration Assistant or the data migration service. You can make use of any one of these two options to migrate information from SAP, for example, to either Azure or SQL Server, right? So that's one scenario. Another scenario here is you are migrating, right, from your SQL Server, an older version, to Microsoft Azure SQL database or SQL, Azure SQL managed instance or Azure SQL Server on a virtual machine. So these are the different options available. So this is more of on-premises to on-premises. This is from a different vendor, right, outside of Microsoft to either Microsoft SQL Server or to Azure. And this is from on-premises to Azure. So this last bucket is what we'll be spending emphasis on, or what we'll be considering in today's session. Okay, so as I said earlier on, that these are two major activities that happen, right, during, or two different tools that you can make use when carrying out migrations. So this an application, a Windows application that you can install on your PC, right, that is responsible for accessing, is responsible also for migration. And this is an Azure-based service. This Azure Database Migration Service is a service based in Azure that you can use, to create a connection between your source, your target, carry out the assessment, evaluate, fix, and then do your data sync. Okay. So as I said, this is just a representation of exactly how the process flow looks like. So there's the source, right? And there's the target. There's the tool sitting in between both of them. The first thing it does, that assessment, it identifies the issue. If there's any issues, it fixes it, and then it goes ahead deploying the schema. Then after that, we do the data sync. So without any further ado, I'm going to try and take us to the demo. But just for your understanding, we'll be doing demos for 3 different scenarios. So we'll be considering 3 different scenarios. And the tools that we'll be using, the first tool, as I said, is the Data Migration Assistant. The Data Migration Assistant, right? So we'll be making use of that. That's going to be the first tool. The second tool is going to be Azure Data Studio. So I would explain what this is when I get to that session. And then the third scenario will be the use of SQL Server Migration Assistant. Okay, so let me just explain what this tool is. So Data Migration Assistant, as I explained, this is the interface. It's a simple interface. If you want to go ahead creating the project, you click on this plus sign. In case you are wondering how do I get this software, it's a free software. You can simply go to any one of your favorite browsers, right, and just search for Data Migration Assistance download, and then you download the application. So once you download the application and open it, it's going to look like this. So let's go ahead and start our migration. Okay, so I click on migration. I give our project a name. So I'm going to call this on-prem to Azure SQL database. Okay. So as I said, what we want to try and do now is to migrate information, migrate a database existing on my local PC, so on my SQL server, and then I want to migrate that database to my Azure SQL database. So before I go ahead and continue with the creation of this project, let me show you my current environment and my current SQL server infrastructure. So I'm going to open a tool called SQL Server Management Studio, right? And I'm going to try and connect to my local SQL instance, right? So once I do that, I go to my databases. I can see I have a number of databases here. So I have one called AdventureWorks Data Warehouse 2020, another AdventureWorks LT 2014, right? And another one Songbird. Okay, so for this demo purpose and for this demo, I'll be making use of AdventureWorks LT 2014. So let me expand into that. Check out the tables. I have a couple of tables, right? I have a couple of views. You see, I have a couple of views here. When I go to my security, I can see I have it. Okay, so I just have DBO, as a user, and the roles are just the basic roles. So I don't have any predefined role. Okay, so that's fine. So I'm just carrying out a basic analysis of the objects that I have within this database, so I can, take note of what is either there or missing. Okay, that's fine. So just to be sure, the version of the instance we are connected to, let me run this query. And so as we can see, this is an SQL Server 2017 instance, right? And it's hosted on my Windows PC. Okay, so that's fine. So we'll go back and check this also by the time we are through with our migration, just to cross-check that, yes, we've actually moved from one environment to the other as we have planned to do. Okay, so I'm going to my DMA, that's Data Migration Assistant. So as I've said, my source is an SQL Server source. The target is an Azure SQL database, right? So it's asking the scope of my migration. So is it just the schema and the data? Is it just the schema only? Is it just the data only? As for me, since it's a fresh migration, I would love to do both the schema and the data. Okay, so I click on my create button. Okay, so at this point it's asking me what is the server name, that's the local instance of my SQL server, Yes, so I have it locally here. So it's called this. That's fine. It's asking me for the type of authentication. Yes, I want it to go ahead and use an SQL Server authentication. Put in my password. Okay. So I'll check these boxes. I want it to be encrypted. I want to also trust the certificate of that server. And I'm going to try and click on connect. Okay, fantastic. So at this point, it's asking me to select the database I actually want to migrate. As I said earlier on, we'll be making use of the AdventureWorks LT 2014. Okay, so we can see the different types of compatibility levels existing. Okay, so that's fine. It says assess database before migration. So as we can see, the box is checked. So what that means is it will carry out a level of evaluation first of all before the migration process takes place. Okay. So at this point now, it's asking me to supply the server name of my Azure SQL database. Okay. So I have that somewhere here also. Okay, so but just before I move forward on this, let me take you to the Azure interface, the Azure portal, and just explain to you how I came about creating this so that it's easy for you to understand when I go back to the portal to show you what we have migrated. Okay, so I'm going to my Azure portal. So you can always access the portal by going to portal.azure.com. So when you click on it, it will ask you to log in with your username and password. So for those who are used to Azure, Azure is one of the most famous world computer. It's a cloud platform owned by Microsoft that is responsible for several different things from databases to application. Think of it to IoT. You can carry out each and every one of these activities on this platform. So I've logged in, right? So one of the things I'm going to try and do is go to my resource group to check out the server. So before now, because it's going to take a bit of time, I've gone ahead to create my SQL server. As you can see, the type is server. The name of the server is Africa Data AI. So I'm going to try and open it. I'm going to try and check my SQL databases. I can see I do not have any databases here yet. Okay, so that's fine. We would have to come here and also create a database that will be moving our information to or our data to. So I've explained this, so let me go back to the data migration tool. Okay, so it's asking me the type of authentication. I want it to be an Azure SQL authentication. The username is fine. I put in my password. Okay, then I'm going to try and connect. Okay. Okay, so notice something, because I don't have any database existing in that server, it's not showing me anything. So let's go ahead and create a new database. So going to my server, go to overview. So on the overview page, you can see create database. So I'm going to go ahead and create a database. Okay, so my subscription is already selected, my resource group is selected. It's asking me for the name of my database. Here is Adventure Works LT 2014. Okay, so that's fine. It's asking me, do I want to use an elastic pool? No. Here I am going to select the compute and storage that is going to back up this SQL database. So I'm going to click on configure database. From this service tier, I just want to choose the basic, which in a way affords me just about $5 or so, about $5 per month. Okay, this will do. I click on apply. So backup redundancy, I just stick with the default. Networking here, yes, I want it to add my current IP address, because if you do not enable that as part of the firewall rule for your networking, it will be difficult for you to connect to the SQL server. So by default, to ensure that there's a security protection, access to any server is defaultly blocked. So you have to ensure you create a firewall exception, such as adding your IP address, whitelisting it to ensure you can connect to it. Okay, so I'm going to select yes. Okay, so I'm going to click on security. I'll leave this as default. I'll leave this as default. Also, use existing data. No, I have my own data. So at this point, it's essential that you confirm the type of database collection that you are creating. So let's go back and confirm the type of database collection that our SQL database is based on. So I come to my SQL Server Management Studio, go to the database, right click, and go to properties, and under properties files, generals, the last option under maintenance is called collation. And as you can see, SQL underscore Latin underscore general blah 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 is the collation. So let's confirm this with what we have in the cloud, and we can see yes, it's fine. So it has the same collation. So we are good to go. Okay. So next, at this point, I'm good to go. And I said create. So what it's going to try and do is, based on the configuration I've set in terms of compute, in terms of storage, in terms of network access, it's going to try and deploy my new database. So we can monitor the deployment process. It's going to start showing me different information as the deployment process is going on. So it's just going to take a while. So what it's doing behind the scenes is ensuring within my server, my database is well configured and is well, deployed. And if all things are equal, right, I should get a green tick, saying that the database has been created. Okay. So just to recap, for those who are just joining us, what we've been doing is based on migration of an SQL database from on-premises to Azure with the use of data migration assistant. That is one of the options we'll be considering in today's class. So we went ahead to create an SQL database in an SQL server that has been provisioned before, and also in the data migration assistant tool, we created a new project. We connected to our SQL server on-premises instance. We also did the one for Azure, right? But we are waiting for the SQL server database to be completed, and I think it's done now. So we can go to the resource, and then we can confirm. So yes, so this is the server name. This is the name of the database. Okay. So let me try and connect. Okay, so that's fine. So as you see, we have already created a new database and it's available for us to use. Okay, so I click on next. Now it's trying to do something. It's doing that process of assessment. It's trying to prepare the schemas available in the source. It will also compare that with the destination, give me information as regards what needs to be fixed, if there are errors in terms of the compatibility level, in terms of the collation, in terms of different types of relevant information needed. So I get to see all of that information, and then I can decide to fix I can decide to either stop the migration, or I can decide to progress with it. So as we can see within the source, so we are looking currently now at the source. So within the source, right, we have the schema called sales LT, and we have these stop procedures. I don't need them, so I'm going to untick them. These are just some default stop procedures. I'm good with these tables. Yes, this user-defined data functions and data types. Yes, I'm good with them. User-defined function is also fine. Views also fine. So all these are fine. So I'm going to try and stick with them. But so that what we are trying to import is not too much, let me just take out a few things. I'll stick with only my tables, my schema, my user-defined data types, and the views. So I'm going to click on generate SQL script. So what's going to try to do is to generate a script for me to create all the different objects that I've selected, from the functions to the views to the table. So yes, this is it. Everything has been created. So at this point, I can decide to save and just say, okay, fine, migration script. Okay. And I can go ahead. So as you can see, there's also an assessment issue showing up here. So this is my source database, this is my target, but as you can see, it's saying that there's no selected object with blocking issues. Same as this, so no selected object with other issues. So this is giving me an indication that I am fine, I'm good. The steps I want to take from migrating from on-premises to Azure is extremely fine. So I click on deploy schema. So what is going to happen is it goes ahead, takes all those different objects, begin to create them right in Azure. So as you can see, it's trying to check if they exist. If they don't exist, it's going to create them. Okay. Okay. So this could take a few seconds. So in the interim, when this continues to update, let me introduce us to another tool called Azure Data Studio. Azure Data Studio, right? So Azure Data Studio is a lightweight SQL editor or code editor created by Microsoft, responsible for data-related activities, either data or AI-related activities. So with this tool, you can query databases, you can connect to notebooks, run your Python scripts against ML models, you can connect to on-premises, Azure, and different types of data sources. You can make use of this tool. So for me, I'm going to try and also so the scenario we're trying to demo here is with the use of the Azure Data Migration Service. So as I said then that we have the Data Migration Assistant as a tool you install on your machine. Then you also have a tool that is a service based in Azure that you can call and make use of when doing your migration. So what I'll be demoing here is the migration of a database now from an SQL server to an SQL server in a virtual machine. So remember, the first demo we did that we're trying to round off is currently running is based on an Azure SQL server database movement or migration from on-premises to an Azure SQL database. So there's the Azure SQL database as an offering. There's the SQL server in a VM as an offering. There is an Azure SQL database managed services or managed database as a service. So we'll be demoing the one currently now from Azure SQL Server, right, to an SQL server in a virtual machine. That's what we're going to be looking at now. Okay, so I'm just going to try and connect and ensure that I'm connected. Okay, so I'm properly connected to my local instance. So I click on manage. Okay, so under my manage, I can see I have the option of Azure SQL Migration. Okay, so we'll come back to this. Let's go and check the progress of our current migration. Okay, so as we can see, it has completed with 56 command executed and 19 errors. But as I go through these errors, I can see that some of them are just based on indexes, based on some functions. Okay, I can live with that. I can live with that. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and say migrate data. So what just completed now was the migration of the objects. That's the objects in terms of the schemas, the tables, the view. What we are now trying to do now is the data sync. So movement of the data itself from each of those tables or views from the on-prem to Azure SQL database. Okay, so it says, do you want to take all of these? Yes, I want to take all of this except for these two. So I stick with just my tables. Okay, and I start my data sync. Okay, so this is also going to take a few seconds. So we'll come back to this and see the progress of it. So what we'll do after this complete is to go to Azure, right? Go to that particular data base and then confirm that we can see all of the objects. The migration was successful. So yes, as we can see, I think it did under 12 seconds, which is fine, right? So we are through with the necessary interventions from our own premises or from the data migration assistance. We've carried out all of the activities and we are good to go. So the next level is to go ahead to Azure. So just refresh. We have the Azure database that was created before. If you can remember, is the AdventureWorks LT 2014. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and come to query editor preview. So what I'm trying to do is within Azure, I want to try and connect to the SQL server and then query my database and confirm that all of my objects are existing. Okay. Okay, so I'm logging in. Fantastic. So I've been able to log in, expanding my tables, expanding my views. Okay, fantastic. So I can see I have the views, I have the tables. Okay, fantastic. So let me just query this just to do a row count and confirm if the records here. So as you can see from here, I have 847 records in my customer table. Let me go back to my SQL Server Management Studio and try and query my customer table and also confirm. Fantastic. So I have 847, so I'm good. So you can also make use of some other tools to do a bit of schema compare, data compare, but that's beyond the scope of this class. So we are through with the first part of the migration. So we've successfully been able to migrate a database from SQL Server to Azure SQL database. So we are going on to the second part, which I've started introducing. So what we are trying to do here is to make use of Azure Data Studio to carry out a migration from an on-premises instance to an SQL server in a virtual machine. So before I go on, let me launch my virtual machine and show you the instance, show you the environment, show you what I currently have running. So that will be our target. We're already familiar with our source. Okay, so we'll now see how we go about with the migration with this tool. So I'm taking you back to Azure. So going back to the dashboard. So I have within my resource group, I've created a virtual machine called VM SQL Server. When I click on it, I can see the information I can use to connect. So it's currently running, right? This is the IP that I can make use of, and then I can connect via RDP. Okay, that's fine. So I'm just going to download the RDP file so that I can use that to connect when I'm set. Okay, so save. I'm writing that, that's fine. So I'm just going to launch this RDP file. So this is going to open up the remote desktop application. It's asking me for my password. Let me go get my password. Okay. So I've inserted my password, and yes, I've been able to log in. So this is my environment in Azure. So this is a virtual machine. So you can see this is a full-blown server. So let me just show you the properties. As you can see, so this is a Windows Server 2016 data center. It's running on an Intel Xeon processor with 4 gig RAM, right? So you can see it's a 64-bit machine. And then let me also show you my environment, my SQL environment, instant server environment. So I'm running these queries. So as you can see, is an SQL Server 2017 instance existing in an hypervisor on this server. So you can see that this is in a virtual machine compared to when I was showing you the version and I was showing that that was on premises. So you can see the difference between this. So if I go ahead, run this, let me just copy this query and show you this against my local instance. Just a moment. New query. You'd see the information I get here. So as you can see, the name is different. You can see it's also an SQL 2017 instance, but this is on a Windows 10 Pro. So this is on my machine. Okay, fine. So we're expecting that by the time I'm through with the migration, I should have my database sitting here in this server. Okay, so let's go on. So going back to Azure Data Studio. So I said I've gone ahead to connect to my local instance just for the sake of being able to also cross-check by the time I'm checking the SQL instance in my VM. I've connected to it here, right? So let me just put in the password. Okay, so I need to get the password from here. Okay, so I've been able to log in here also. If I click on manage, I can also see the same information we saw the other time, just to validate that yes, it's actually that environment that we connected to. Just give it a few seconds, it's trying to load, so we can see it's on a data center SQL Server 2016. You see this is the name of the server, that's fine. So this is our local instance on the Windows 10 Pro. Okay, so from the source, right, I'm going to launch the Azure SQL Migration. So I click on it and say go ahead. So this is going to guide me through a few steps that I'm going to use. So I'm selecting my Azure account, which I've signed in, my default tenant. Okay, that's fine. Yeah, it's asking me the type of data or the database I actually want to migrate. I'm sticking with the AdventureWorks LT 2014. I click on next. It's trying to do an assessment, which also happened when we also made use of data migration assistant tool. Okay, so it's asking me to select the database. So I want to select the AdventureWorks LT 2014. Okay, so it's asking me select your target Azure subscription. So you need a subscription to be able to carry this out. So my subscription is already selected. It's asking me for my location. I know that the location for where I want to use my services are in West Europe, and the resource group is called PB databases. Okay, so automatically he has generated, because I have just only one virtual machine in this resource group, it has selected that for me, which is VM SQL Server. Okay, that's fine. I click on next. It's asking me for the mode of migration. So take note, there are two types of migration modes, right? The first one is online. This consists of the process whereby your application will not go down. Your application will keep running as you are carrying out that migration. But for offline migration, your application will have a downtime, will go down immediately the migration process starts. So take note the difference between these two. So I'm going to stick with the online migration and click on next. Select the location of your database backup. So you need to have provisioned a blob storage where your backup can be kept, where you'd also have, so you would have done a backup of that local instance or that local database, created a blob storage in Azure, and keep that backup there for reference purpose. Okay, so I'm going to ask that I'm going to select the usage of an Azure blob container. So you can also make use of a network share, but we are sticking with the use of Azure storage blob container. So here is giving me the information of my source database, my target database name. It's asking me for the resource group I want to use. I want to stick with my PB databases. So I have my storage account there called PB Blob Store, and then the name of my container is PB Blob SQL Backup. So it has automatically populated all this for me because I've created them, and there's also one only single instance of those features in Azure. Okay, so fine, this has been populated, resource group. So take note, at this point now, I am going to leverage on Azure Database Migration Service. So, we're talking about the different types of tools we can make use of. We did the DMA, Data Migration Assistant. Here, we are making use of the Azure Database Migration Service. So this is an Azure offering. So it's asking for my subscription, for my location, where do I want the resource group to be. So I want it provisioned in my PB databases. And then I have a default instance of the service created called Azure Migrate. So this is what it's going to use for the migration process. So I'm going to click on next, and then it gives me a summary. So just to browse through, this quick summary is fine, and I click done. So once I click done, I just need to come to this interface and be monitoring. So you can see this Azure SQL migration. So if I have multiple migrations running, you would see it running here. So you can see it was very, very fast. Okay, no, so it's still in progress. Database migration is still in progress. Once this is completed, right, this would change to 0 and this would change to 1. So let's give this a while as it begin to migrate those the database and the information. So behind the scenes, unlike before when we were making use of the DMA that we had to do, we were seeing how we did the migration of the schema and the data sync. But as for this, we are not seeing it is running behind the scenes because it's leveraging on that service in Azure, to connect, copy the object, the schemas into the new database. It's going to create that database also, and then it's also going to ensure that it moves the data. Okay, so that's fine. So in the interim, when this is running, let me introduce you to the third part of the migration. So here we would be migrating a database, an access database, right, from on-premises to Azure. But the route we will go through is, first of all, ensure that that database is replicated into an on-premises instance, an on-premises database, and then we'll move that data from that on-premises instance to Azure. So the key thing that we are learning here is we are taking a database from Access and we are trying to migrate it to Azure. But we're introducing a step here whereby it first goes into an Azure, into an SQL Server instance, and from there we push it into Azure SQL database. Okay, so the tool that we're going to be using for that is called the SQL Server Migration Assistant. So it's SQL Server Migration Assistant for Access. So kindly take note that for each of the different vendors, we have a specialized SQL Server Migration Assistant. So for Access, it has installation. For Oracle, for SAP, for IBM, all of these different vendors have their own specialized application that they can use for the migration. Okay, so here I'm going to go ahead and launch my wizard. So I will launch my migration wizard. I'll say, okay, fine, I'm creating an SSME project. That's fine. So this is the name of the database. It's called Songbird, right? So migration. So I'm going to just reference where it's going to be saved. I want to migrate this to an SQL Server 2017 on-premises first. Yes. Okay. So it's asking me to add my access database. So I'm going to go ahead and add that because that is my source. So my access DB, Songbird. Okay, I click on next. So it's evaluating all of the different types of objects existing within that access database. So I want it to do both my tables and my queries. Okay, so that's fine. I click on next. It's asking me for the name of the server. So this is the name of the server. The port, yes, default 1433. The name of the database, yes. So I want this to be Songbird new. Yes, use a Windows authentication. Then I click on next. So it's saying that that database, Songbird new, does not exist. So it's asking me if it should create the database. As I would click yes. So it's going to go ahead and provision a new database for me. Link tables. So let me click on link tables. So what it's currently doing now is it's evaluating my source and my targets. And as you can see, it's going to move all of the tables existing in my local, that's in my access database, and it's going to move them into the database on Azure, on SQL. Okay, so it's converting all of the objects to, just a moment, I ran into a brief error here. Let me click on this. This works this morning. Okay, so let me just create a new one. Think. Okay, let me go ahead and create a new one. Okay, this is fine. Next, add my database. Okay, next. So it's evaluating my access database, right? So I'll just stick with my tables for now. I click on next. The time is almost running out, so I'm trying to quickly hurry up with this. Okay, click on next. Okay, so let's go check our database now. SSMS, that's SQL Server Management Studio. Refresh that. And as we can see, the new database has been created. And then we have those tables. So these tables are the tables existing in our Access database, and I've successfully been able to migrate those tables from an Access database to the instance, the SQL database I created on my local instance. So from here, right, I can easily go ahead and make use of a feature in SQL Server Management Studio called Deploy Database to Microsoft Azure SQL Database. So I can make use of this wizard to go ahead and deploy that particular database. So let me just copy the name of the server. So we'll be rounding up very soon. But let me just run this. So in the process, in the back end is just going to be running. So this is the name of the server. I copy my server name. Okay, start it here. Just make use of the option of connect. Yes, so I'm using the one here. This, put in my password. Connect. Okay, so it's going to provision this new database for me. I want it one basic blah blah blah, and by all means would expect that in the next few minutes it goes ahead, creates the database in Azure, do the assessment, create the objects, copy the information from the local to the SQL database, and that should end the process of migrating data from an Access database to Azure SQL database. So I'm going to be doing a recap. So let me just refresh this and see if it has completed. Okay, so it's currently still in progress. It's currently still in progress. Let me log in and see. Okay, so as we can see, it's currently trying to restore. So it has created the database, but I can't view it because it's currently restoring. So this process of restoration is trying to copy the data. It must have created all of the objects. It must have created the views, the tables, all of this will have been created, and then it goes ahead and does a restore from the backup that we have already created and updated or uploaded into our blob storage. So without any further ado, I would love to take questions at this point, as it's 1 o'clock on the dot, and I've been able to go through the 3 tiers of migration that would probably, want to encounter when trying to migrate data from on-premises to Azure.
Okay, thanks a lot, Paul. Okay,
Yes.
thanks for the wonderful session. I think we have a couple of questions. I'll try
Okay.
to answer, but I missed track of some. I would have loved to answer back, but I didn't actually get uh, where it's directing to. So Adebayo has some questions, and I can see. Okay, I think Adebayo hands is up. So I think we first take the question from Adebayo, and then we
Okay.
take from Adebayo too. Adebayo is asking, must we have match name of this adventure work for source and target? And
Sorry, I'm hardly hearing you.
oh,
Go ahead.
sorry.
Yes.
Can you hear me now? It's
Yes, I
raining
can.
here. It's already raining here, so
Okay.
the network is fluctuating up and down. So, okay, the first question is from Adebayo. Must we have match name of adventure work for source and target? So I think that is
No,
about
no. So we do not
exactly
need to have matching names when it comes to the database that we are creating. It's just for
exactly.
the purpose of recognizing that I'm actually migrating this database, so it's easier for me to cross-check when I'm doing an evaluation probably
Okay.
sometime later. And
I
since
think
there was an application also that was connected to that database, we must have built the name of that database in the application. So it's easy for us to just point the new location or the name of the server. We don't essentially need to go and change the database. So all we will just need to focus on is change the server name, but the database remains the same. So those are probably some of the reasons why people would want to use the same name when migrating a database.
I think the most important thing is the schema and the metadata. Once they are correct, that's the most important thing. The name is just like a display name. So I think Adebayo can, you can go ahead, Adebayo.
All right.
I'm right.
Thank you for the lecture. It made a lot of sense. So, from your experience, if somebody is deploying an enterprise level project, which of the migration technique would you recommend?
Yes, so for an enterprise level, right, I would recommend him making use of the Azure data migration service.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, I would recommend that. Yes. Do
I
we
don't
have any
think we
other
have any
questions?
other question. I don't think so. I don't think
Okay.
so. I don't think so.
Okay.
Adebayo, your hand is still up. So I think
Uh,
it's actually okay. Okay, so it's actually a very good session. Do you still have a question for us,
no,
Adebayo?
no, 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 no.
Okay, okay. So thanks a lot, Paul. We
Okay.
actually go through the process, and I know the record. I know it's an added value because the recording for the session is already being requested for. So, for participants to request for that is actually something they need on immediately. So, thanks a lot for the session. We appreciate you. I know it's actually a good time. Also, it's actually a very rough time for a lot of people. Is remaining network issues and that and that. But I know a lot of people will catch up with the recording. Uh, Thank you, participants. We'd love to have you next week. It's going to be a wonderful session from next week. For people planning to take the Azure Data Fundamental, a series of webinar will commence from next week. I will try our best to take the time and improve on every other thing. Thank you, Paul. Any other added value from any person at
Yes.
this moment?
Yes, so
Okay.
just to add to prepare our viewers ready against our next session. So we will begin a series for learning Azure Data Fundamentals from next week. It's going to last for the next 3 months, from the first week of October till the end of December. So I would want you to join us. Don't miss that session. It's going to be very, very educative. We'll be taking the curriculum of that particular certifications every week, and we'll be reviewing them in details, taking your questions, answering them. And if you are able to follow through that session, I think you should be good enough to go and write the exams. So look out for that. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, everybody. Nice having you. Goodbye.